On a quiet suburban road, a young black girl finds herself cornered by racist police officers who exploit their authority in a malicious display of power. Believing she is alone and powerless, they escalate their actions until she calls her father, a well-known judge, for help. What follows is a dramatic clash between corruption and accountability as her father leverages his influence to expose the officers and demand justice, turning a moment of fear into a fight for systemic change. Don't forget to like and comment where you are from. The night everything changed. 16-year-old Aaliyah Jackson adjusted her rearview mirror as the eerie stillness of the suburban road enveloped her. The soft notes of her favorite R&B playlist filled the car, but the familiar comfort of the music couldn't shake her unease. It was late, later than her father, Judge Malcolm Jackson, would have liked for her to be out alone. But she had been engrossed in a study session at her best friend Kayla's house, determined to ace her upcoming exams. The road was empty, save for the faint glow of streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. As she turned onto Ashwood Lane, the unmistakable flash of red and blue lights illuminated her rearview mirror. Her heart sank. Aaliyah instinctively checked her speedometer. She wasn't speeding. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as she pulled to the side of the road, her breath shallow. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself. Her father had drilled into her the importance of staying composed during interactions with law enforcement. Still, a knot of fear formed in her stomach. The police cruiser came to a halt behind her, and two officers stepped out. The taller of the two, Officer Briggs, exuded intimidation with his hulking frame and cold demeanor. His partner, Officer Riley, was shorter but no less menacing. Both had their flashlights drawn, their beams cutting through the darkness as they approached her car. Aaliyah rolled down her window slightly, her voice steady despite her growing unease. "Good evening, officers. Is something wrong?" Briggs ignored her question. "License and registration," he barked. Aaliyah complied, her trembling hands fumbling with her wallet and the glove compartment. She handed over her documents, her mind racing with scenarios of what might come next. Briggs scanned her license, his lips curling into a smirk. "What's a girl like you doing out here so late?" "I was studying at a friend's house," Aaliyah said, her voice careful, measured. "Studying, huh?" Riley chimed in from the other side of the car. "And what's in the trunk? Anything we should know about?" Aaliyah's brows furrowed. "Just books and some clothes," she replied. Briggs's smirk faded into a sneer. "Step out of the car." Her heart skipped a beat. "Why? I haven't done anything wrong." "Step out of the car," Briggs repeated, his tone harsher. Knowing she had no choice, Aaliyah unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped onto the cold pavement. Riley immediately circled to the back of her car, tapping on the trunk with his flashlight. "Pop it open," he ordered. "It's just school supplies," Aaliyah said, her voice trembling now. "Do it," Briggs snapped. With shaky hands, Aaliyah pressed the button to release the trunk. Riley rummaged through her belongings, tossing notebooks and a duffel bag onto the ground. "Nothing here," Riley muttered, almost disappointed. Briggs stepped closer to Aaliyah, his tall frame towering over her. "Empty your pockets," he demanded. "I don't have anything in my pockets," she replied. "Don't make me say it again," Briggs growled. Reluctantly, Aaliyah turned out her pockets, revealing only her phone and a crumpled receipt. Briggs snatched the phone from her hand. "I'm calling my dad," Aaliyah said, her voice firm despite the lump forming in her throat. Briggs's eyes narrowed. "Oh, calling Daddy, huh? What's he gonna do? Bail you out?" Aaliyah didn't answer. She hit the call button for her father's number, but before it could connect, Briggs ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. "Not tonight," he said smugly. Unbeknownst to Briggs and Riley, Judge Malcolm Jackson was already growing concerned. When his daughter's call had been cut off abruptly, he immediately used a family locator app to track her phone. As he slipped on his jacket and grabbed his keys, he called a trusted friend at the police department to alert them of a potential issue. Meanwhile, on Ashwood Lane, the officer's harassment escalated. "You think you're smart, don't you?" Briggs said, his face inches from Aaliyah's. "Think you're better than us?" "I just want to go home," Aaliyah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Riley chuckled. "Not so fast. We're just getting started." The officer's taunts were interrupted by the sound of an approaching engine. A black luxury sedan pulled up behind the police cruiser, its headlights slicing through the tension-filled darkness. Judge Jackson stepped out, his commanding presence immediately shifting the dynamic. His tailored suit and sharp expression left no doubt about who he was. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his deep voice resonating with authority. Briggs turned, clearly irritated. "This doesn't concern you, sir. Move along." Judge Jackson's eyes locked onto his daughter. "Aaliyah, are you okay?" "Dad," she cried, relief flooding her voice. "They won't let me leave. They took my phone and searched my car without a reason." Briggs squared his shoulders, trying to maintain his dominance. "Sir, we're conducting a routine stop. Your daughter was acting suspiciously." "Suspiciously?" Judge Jackson repeated, his tone ice-cold. "She's a 16-year-old girl driving home from a friend's house. What exactly is suspicious about that?" Riley stepped forward. "She resisted our commands." "I see," Judge Jackson said, his voice calm but firm. "So you decided to confiscate her phone, search her car without a warrant, and detain her without cause. I trust you have body camera footage to justify this." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. "Return her phone," Judge Jackson commanded. Briggs hesitated before pulling the phone from his pocket and tossing it onto the ground at Aaliyah's feet. "This isn't over," Judge Jackson said, his tone a warning. "I'll be filing a formal complaint and escalating this to the chief of police." As he guided Aaliyah back to his car, the officers retreated to their cruiser, their bravado replaced by unease. The reckoning begins. Judge Malcolm Jackson was a man who believed in action. That night, as the echoes of Aaliyah's trembling voice faded in his study, he channeled his fury into meticulous planning. He was no stranger to systemic injustice, having spent decades as both a prosecutor and a judge, but this time it was personal. With every word Aaliyah had shared, he felt the weight of her fear and humiliation. And while the officers had likely counted on her silence, they had severely underestimated her father. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, scanning the notes he'd taken on his laptop. The list of violations was staggering: unlawful detention, illegal search and seizure, verbal harassment, physical intimidation, and a blatant abuse of power. He knew this wasn't just a case of bad apples. It was emblematic of a deeper rot in the system he had dedicated his life to holding accountable. He dialed the first number on his list. "Alicia Harper speaking," a clear voice answered. "Alicia, it's Malcolm. I need your help." Alicia Harper was one of the most respected investigative journalists in the state, known for her fearless exposés on police misconduct and corruption. She and Malcolm had worked together on several cases in the past, and he trusted her to handle this with the precision and care it required. "Tell me everything," she said, already grabbing her notepad. Malcolm recounted the events in detail, his voice steady but laced with a quiet anger. Alicia listened intently, occasionally interjecting with questions to clarify the timeline. "This is big," she said when he finished, "and it's not just about Aaliyah. How many other young black kids have been through this without anyone to advocate for them?" "Exactly," Malcolm replied. "I want to make this public, but I also want to make sure it's airtight. No room for them to spin it or discredit her. I'll start digging into the officer's records first thing in the morning," Alicia promised. "If they've done this before, and I'm sure they have, we'll find it." The next morning, Aaliyah woke to the sound of her father's phone buzzing incessantly. She stumbled into the kitchen, still groggy, to find Malcolm already dressed in a crisp suit, his laptop open on the counter beside a steaming cup of coffee. "You're up early," she mumbled. "I didn't sleep much," he admitted, glancing at her. "How are you feeling?" She shrugged. "Better, I guess, but I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't shown up." "You don't have to think about that," he said firmly. "We're going to make sure they face consequences for what they did." As Aaliyah poured herself a bowl of cereal, Malcolm's phone rang again. This time it was Chief Daniels, the head of the local police department. "Malcolm," Daniels began, his tone measured. "I heard about the incident last night. I want to assure you that we're taking this seriously." "I hope so, Chief," Malcolm replied, "because I've already filed a formal complaint and I've contacted the press. This won't be swept under the rug." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I understand your frustration, but let's not rush to conclusions. I'll open an internal investigation. With all due respect, Chief, internal investigations don't have a great track record, Malcolm said sharply. I'll be pushing for an independent review. After the call ended, Aaliyah stared at her father. Do you think they'll actually do anything? They'll try to save face, Malcolm said. But whether they do the right thing or not depends on how much pressure we apply. By noon, the story was already gaining traction. Alicia's initial article, titled "Judge's Daughter Harassed by Police Abuse of Power on Ashwood Lane," had gone live on the local news site and was being shared rapidly on social media. Comments poured in, a mix of outrage and skepticism. "She's lucky her dad's a judge," one comment read. "Most kids wouldn't stand a chance." "Typical media spin," said another. "Let the cops do their job." But for every dismissive remark, there were voices of support. "This has to stop. How many more kids have to go through this?" "Accountability starts at the top. Fire Briggs and Riley now." At school, Aaliyah felt the ripple effects immediately. Her friends rallied around her, offering words of encouragement, but there were also stares and whispers from students she barely knew. "Hey, are you okay?" Kayla asked as they walked to lunch. "Yeah," Aaliyah said, though her voice wavered. "It's just a lot." "Well, if anyone gives you a hard time, let me know," Kayla said fiercely. "We've got your back." Meanwhile, Alicia's investigation uncovered a troubling pattern. Both Officer Briggs and Officer Riley had multiple complaints filed against them over the years, most of which had been quietly dismissed. Allegations ranged from excessive force to racial profiling, but none had resulted in disciplinary action. Alicia forwarded her findings to Malcolm, who immediately sent them to his legal contacts. Together, they began drafting a formal request for an independent investigation into the department's handling of misconduct cases. "This isn't just about Aaliyah anymore," Malcolm told Alicia during a late-night call. "This is about exposing a culture of impunity." As the week went on, the pressure mounted. Protests were organized outside the police department, with community leaders and activists demanding accountability. Signs reading "Justice for Aaliyah" and "End Police Brutality" filled the streets, their chants echoing through the air. Inside the station, tensions were high. Briggs and Riley had been placed on administrative leave, but many officers viewed them as martyrs rather than culprits. "This is ridiculous," Briggs fumed during a meeting with the police union. We didn't do anything wrong." "You're being scapegoated," the union rep agreed, "but we'll fight this." Unbeknownst to them, Alicia had obtained a leaked body camera recording from a whistleblower within the department. The footage showed Briggs and Riley taunting Aaliyah, with Briggs saying, "You think your daddy's gonna save you?" The video quickly went viral, sparking national outrage. The turning point came during a televised town hall meeting. Malcolm and Aaliyah were invited to speak, alongside community leaders and police representatives. When it was her turn, Aaliyah took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. "My name is Aaliyah Jackson," she began, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "And I'm here because I don't want what happened to me to happen to anyone else." She recounted the night of the stop, her words painting a vivid picture of fear and helplessness. "No one should have to feel like their life doesn't matter," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "But that's how they made me feel." The room erupted in applause, with many in the audience moved to tears. Even Malcolm, who rarely displayed emotion publicly, looked visibly proud. The following week, the police chief announced that Briggs and Riley would face termination, pending a disciplinary hearing. Additionally, the department agreed to implement mandatory anti-bias training and establish a community oversight board, a first for the city. For Malcolm and Aaliyah, it was a bittersweet victory. The officers who had hurt her would face consequences, but they knew the fight for justice was far from over. "This is just the beginning," Malcolm told her one evening. "Real change takes time." Aaliyah nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. "Then let's keep going." A community united. The story of Aaliyah Jackson and her harrowing encounter with Officers Briggs and Riley had sparked a firestorm. What began as a single moment of fear on a lonely suburban road had now become a rallying cry for change. Across the city of Brookwood, residents were waking up to a reality that had been swept in the days following the release of the leaked body camera footage. The Jackson home had become a hub of activity. Malcolm Jackson's phone rang constantly. Calls from reporters, activists, and even concerned parents who feared for their own children. The weight of, "We need to keep the pressure on," Malcolm said to Alicia Harper as they sat at his dining room table. Aaliyah, sitting quietly nearby, watched as her father strategized with the seasoned journalist. "I'm working on a follow-up piece," Alicia replied, flipping through her notes. "Briggs and Riley aren't the only ones. I've uncovered a pattern of misconduct within the department. Complaints ignored, reports buried, and internal reviews that went nowhere." "That's exactly what we need," Malcolm said, leaning forward. "This isn't just about two bad cops. It's about a system that enables them." Word of Aaliyah's story spread far beyond Brookwood. Social media was flooded with posts demanding justice, with hashtags like "Justice for Aaliyah" and "Ang's Accountability Now" trending nationwide. Videos of the protests outside the police department gained millions of views, drawing attention from national news outlets. At the center of it all was Aaliyah herself. Despite her initial reluctance, she had become a symbol of resilience and courage. Her face appeared on news segments, her voice amplified in interviews where she spoke about the fear she felt that night and her hope for a better future. "I'm not just speaking for myself," she said during an appearance on a popular morning show. "I'm speaking for every kid who's ever been treated like they don't matter, for every family that's had to live with the fear that I felt." Her words resonated deeply, sparking conversations in households and classrooms across the country. But with visibility came challenges. Not everyone was on Aaliyah's side. In the same way the movement gained supporters, it also attracted detractors. Anonymous posts flooded online forums, accusing Aaliyah of fabricating her story. Flyers appeared around Brookwood, labeling her father as anti-police and calling for his removal from the bench. At home, the Jackson family began receiving threatening phone calls. Malcolm installed additional security cameras around their property, but the tension weighed heavily on everyone. "Why do they hate us so much?" Aaliyah asked one evening, her voice breaking as she sat beside her father. "They don't hate you," Malcolm said gently. "They hate what you represent. Change scares people, especially those who benefit from the way things are." Undeterred by the backlash, Malcolm and Alicia worked tirelessly to channel the momentum into tangible action. They partnered with local organizations to organize a town hall meeting, inviting residents to share their stories and demand reforms. The event was held at the Brookwood Community Center, where every seat was filled and people lined the walls. Aaliyah sat in the front row, flanked by Kayla and her mother. Malcolm took the stage first, his deep voice commanding the attention of the crowd. "This isn't just about my daughter," he began. "It's about accountability. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what she did." As Malcolm spoke, the audience nodded in agreement, their faces a mix of anger and determination. He then invited others to come forward and share their experiences. One by one, residents took the microphone. A middle-aged black man recounted how he was pulled over 5 times in 1 month for looking suspicious. A young woman shared how her brother was beaten during a traffic stop for failing to signal a turn. Each story added fuel to the growing movement, painting a damning picture of the Brookwood Police Department. When it was Aaliyah's turn to speak, the room fell silent. She hesitated for a moment, her hands gripping the edges of the podium. "I didn't ask for this," she began, her voice steady but soft. "I didn't want to become the face of something so painful. But if my story can help even one person, then it's worth it." Her words were met with thunderous applause, the crowd rising to their feet in a standing ovation. While the community rallied for change, the Brookwood Police Department scrambled to manage the fallout. Chief Daniels sat in a tense meeting with the city council, his usual confidence replaced by visible discomfort. "We can't ignore this anymore," said Councilwoman Rivera, her tone sharp. "The people are demanding accountability, and we need to deliver." Chief Daniels sighed. "We've placed Briggs and Riley on administrative leave pending investigation. Isn't that enough?" "No," Rivera shot back. "It's not enough. We need independent oversight. We need reforms." Daniels knew she was right, But the idea of an external investigation made his stomach churn. He had spent years protecting the reputation of his department, and the thought of exposing its flaws was almost too much to bear. The pressure reached its peak when Alicia Harper published a damning exposé titled "The System on Trial: A Culture of Impunity in Brookwood PD." The article detailed years of unchecked misconduct, naming names and citing evidence that painted a clear picture of systemic corruption. The exposé sent shockwaves through the city. Calls for Chief Daniels' resignation grew louder, and the mayor announced plans to implement a civilian oversight board, a demand that had long been ignored. For Aaliyah and Malcolm, it was a bittersweet victory. They had ignited a movement, but the road ahead was still uncertain. One evening, as the sun set over Brookwood, Malcolm and Aaliyah sat on their porch watching the world go by. For the first time in weeks, there was a sense of calm. "You've done something incredible, you know," Malcolm said, turning to his daughter. Aaliyah smiled faintly. "I didn't do it alone." "No, you didn't," he agreed, "but it wouldn't have happened without you." As they sat together, the sound of distant chants carried on the wind, protesters marching through the streets, their voices calling for justice. It wasn't the end, but it was a start. The system strikes back. The movement sparked by Aaliyah's story was growing stronger by the day, but with every step forward came an equally powerful pushback. The Brookwood Police Department and its allies were determined to protect their authority, even if it meant resorting to underhanded tactics. What had begun as a fight for accountability was quickly becoming a battle of wills, with the stakes higher than ever. In the weeks following the town hall meeting, tensions in Brookwood reached a boiling point. Protesters gathered daily outside the police department, their chants of justice for Aaliyah ringing through the air. But as the movement gained momentum, so did the opposition. Counter-protesters began showing up, waving signs that read, "Support our police" and "Stop the witch hunt." The clashes were mostly verbal at first, but it didn't take long for things to turn physical. During one particularly heated demonstration, a counter-protester threw a bottle into the crowd, hitting a young woman and sending her to the hospital. The incident made headlines, with both sides blaming each other for the violence. Aaliyah watched the news coverage from her living room, her heart sinking as commentators debated whether the movement had gone too far. "They're trying to paint us as the aggressors," she said, frustration evident in her voice. Malcolm nodded grimly. "That's their strategy. If they can make us look unreasonable, they can justify ignoring our demands." But the backlash wasn't limited to the streets. The Jackson family began receiving anonymous threats, both online and at home. One morning, Malcolm found a note taped to their front door that read, "Go back to where you came from." Aaliyah's mother, Camille, who had largely stayed out of the public eye, was visibly shaken. "This is getting out of hand, Malcolm," she said, her voice trembling. "What if they come after Aaliyah?" "They won't," Malcolm assured her, though even he couldn't hide the flicker of doubt in his eyes. The growing tension in Brookwood was impossible to ignore. Schools, workplaces, and even churches became battlegrounds for heated debates about the movement and its implications. Aaliyah, who had always kept a relatively low profile at school, now found herself at the center of attention. Some students rallied around her, wearing T-shirts with slogans like "I stand with Aaliyah," and organizing lunchtime discussions about systemic racism. But others weren't as supportive. "She's just doing this for attention," one boy sneered as Aaliyah walked past him in the hallway. Kayla, ever the loyal friend, shot back, "And you're just mad because you know she's right." Despite the support from her friends, the scrutiny took its toll on Aaliyah. She found herself retreating from social interactions, spending more and more time in her room. "I just want things to go back to normal," she admitted to Kayla one evening during a phone call. "I know," Kayla said gently, "but maybe normal wasn't good enough. Maybe this is what it takes to make things better." Amid the chaos, Malcolm and Alicia continued to push for tangible reforms. Their primary demand was the creation of a civilian oversight board to review allegations of police misconduct. But the proposal faced fierce resistance from the police union and several members of the city council. "This board would undermine our ability to do our jobs," argued Officer Bradley, a union representative during a council meeting. It's an insult to every officer who puts their life on the line every day. Malcolm, who had been invited to speak, countered, "What's insulting is allowing officers who abuse their power to operate without accountability. This board isn't about undermining good cops. It's about holding bad ones accountable." The debate raged on for hours, with both sides presenting passionate arguments. But when the meeting adjourned, no decision had been made. "They're stalling," Alicia said, as she and Malcolm walked out of the council chambers. "Let them," Malcolm replied. "We'll just keep pushing." The turning point came when Alicia published a follow-up exposé, revealing not only the misconduct of Briggs and Riley, but also a pattern of cover-ups orchestrated by high-ranking officials within the department. The article named names, included leaked emails, and painted a damning picture of a culture of impunity. The exposé sent shockwaves through Brookwood. Protesters swarmed the streets, demanding the resignation of Chief Daniels and other implicated officials. The mayor, who had previously remained neutral, was forced to issue a statement condemning the corruption and pledging to restore trust in law enforcement. But the backlash against the exposé was swift and brutal. Alicia began receiving threats, and one evening, her car was vandalized outside her home. "This is getting dangerous," Malcolm said when she called to tell him what had happened. "I'm not backing down," Alicia replied. "They're scared because they know the truth is coming out." As the fight escalated, Aaliyah struggled to cope with the pressure. The constant media attention, the threats, and the weight of being a symbol for a movement began to feel unbearable. One night, after a particularly heated argument with her parents, she broke down in tears. "I didn't ask for any of this," she cried. "I just want to be a normal kid again." Camille pulled her into a hug, stroking her hair as she whispered, "I know, baby. I know." Malcolm stood nearby, his heart breaking as he watched his daughter crumble under the weight of a fight she never asked for. Despite the challenges, there were moments of light. One afternoon, Aaliyah received a letter from a young girl named Maya, who wrote, "Dear Aaliyah, thank you for being so brave. My big brother says you're a hero. I think so too. I want to be just like you when I grow up." The letter brought Aaliyah to tears, but this time, they were tears of gratitude. "It's worth it," she told her father that evening. "If I can make even one person feel seen, it's worth it." Malcolm smiled, pride shining in his eyes. "You're making a difference, Aaliyah. Don't ever forget that." The city council finally scheduled a vote on the Civilian Oversight Board. The night of the vote, the council chambers were packed, with supporters and detractors filling every available seat. When the results were announced, 6-3 in favor of creating the board, the room erupted into cheers. Aaliyah, watching from home with her parents, let out a relieved laugh as she hugged them tightly. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with a mix of disbelief and joy. "No," Malcolm corrected gently. "You did it." The cost of justice. The passage of the Civilian Oversight Board was a victory, but it came at a steep price. The Jackson family had become the face of a movement that had shaken Brookwood to its core, and not everyone celebrated their success. The air in town was tense, crackling with the kind of unease that signaled the storm was far from over. For Aaliyah, the weeks following the council vote were a whirlwind of interviews, schoolwork, and trying to regain some semblance of normalcy. But normal was no longer an option. Everywhere she went, people recognized her, some offering words of encouragement, others glaring in open hostility. At school, Aaliyah faced both admiration and animosity. While many of her peers rallied around her, others resented the attention she brought to the town. The whispers in the hallways were impossible to ignore. "She thinks she's better than everyone," one girl muttered as Aaliyah walked past. "I heard her dad bribed the council," another said. Aaliyah kept her head down, pretending not to hear, but the comments stung. The emotional toll of being thrust into the spotlight was beginning to show. At home, things weren't much easier. The Jackson family's phone rang constantly, with both supporters and detractors voicing their opinions. One evening, Malcolm answered a particularly venomous call. "Your daughter's a liar, and you're nothing but a race baiter," the voice on the other end spat. Malcolm hung up calmly, but Aaliyah could see the frustration etched on his face. "They're scared," he said, as if trying to reassure both her and himself. "That's why they're lashing out." While the Civilian Oversight Board was being assembled, the Brookwood Police Department made it clear they weren't going down without a fight. A wave of officers called in sick, an organized Blue Flu protest designed to disrupt the city's operations and undermine the new reforms. The absence of officers left the community vulnerable, and the department was quick to blame the Oversight Board for the chaos. News outlets sympathetic to law enforcement ran headlines like, "Brookwood in crisis, anti-police movement backfires." Malcolm watched the coverage with a grim expression. "They're trying to turn public opinion against us," he said. Aaliyah frowned. "Is it working?" "Not yet," Malcolm replied, "but we need to stay ahead of them." Amid the chaos, an unexpected ally emerged. Lieutenant Rebecca Hayes, a veteran officer with a spotless record, publicly criticized the Blue Flu protest and called for unity. "This isn't about choosing sides," she said during a press conference. "It's about rebuilding trust between the police and the community. We can't do that if we refuse to engage with the people we're supposed to serve." Her words were a breath of fresh air, offering a glimpse of hope in an otherwise bleak situation. Malcolm reached out to her, and the two began collaborating on ways to ensure the Oversight Board's success. "Not all officers are like Briggs and Riley," Hayes told him during their first meeting. "Some of us want to see real change too." While her father worked tirelessly behind the scenes, Aaliyah found herself grappling with the emotional weight of everything that had happened. The trauma of that night on Ashwood Lane lingered, manifesting in nightmares and sudden bouts of anxiety. One evening, after a particularly vivid nightmare, she broke down in tears. "I don't know how much more of this I can take," she admitted to her mother. Camille held her tightly. "You've been so strong, sweetheart. It's okay to feel overwhelmed, but you don't have to carry this alone." At Camille's insistence, Aaliyah began seeing a therapist who helped her process her experiences and develop coping mechanisms. Slowly but surely, she began to feel more like herself again. As the Civilian Oversight Board prepared to hold its first meeting, Malcolm and Alicia worked to ensure its legitimacy. They helped recruit members from diverse backgrounds, including activists, legal experts, and even former officers like Lieutenant Hayes. The board's mission was clear: to investigate allegations of police misconduct, review policies, and recommend reforms. But its establishment was met with fierce resistance. During a public forum, a group of officers and their supporters gathered to voice their objections. "This board is nothing but a witch hunt," one officer shouted. "You're putting our lives at risk." Malcolm stepped up to the podium, his voice calm but firm. "No one is above accountability," he said. "If you're doing your job with integrity, you have nothing to fear." His words were met with applause from the crowd, but the tension in the room was palpable. As the fight continued, Aaliyah began to find her own way to contribute. She started speaking at schools and community events, sharing her story and encouraging young people to stand up for what they believed in. During one such event, a high school student approached her afterward. "Thank you for speaking," the girl said shyly. "Hearing you made me feel like I'm not alone." Aaliyah smiled, her heart swelling with a sense of purpose. "You're not alone," she said, "and you're stronger than you think." These moments reminded Aaliyah why the fight was worth it. She wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for everyone who had ever felt powerless. The police union's attempts to derail the Oversight Board reached a climax when they filed a lawsuit challenging its legality. The case quickly became a flashpoint, drawing national attention and sparking heated debates. Malcolm worked tirelessly with a team of attorneys to defend the board, while Alicia continued to expose the union's tactics in the press. The courtroom battle was intense, with both sides presenting passionate arguments. In the end, the judge ruled in favor of the Oversight Board, declaring it a necessary step toward accountability. The decision was a major victory, but Malcolm knew the fight was far from over. "This is just the beginning," he told Aaliyah as they left the courthouse. With the Oversight Board now fully operational, the Jackson family finally began to feel a sense of closure. But they also knew that their work was far from done. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Aaliyah turned to her father. "Do you think things will really change?" "I think they already have," Malcolm replied. "And it's because of you." Aaliyah smiled, a glimmer of hope shining in her eyes. For the first time in months, she felt at peace. The weight of victory. The courtroom victory solidifying the Civilian Oversight Board marked a pivotal moment, but Malcolm and Aaliyah knew that victory came with a cost. While the reforms symbolized progress, the battle scars, both visible and invisible, remained. For Brookwood, this was only the beginning of a long road toward healing. For the Jackson family, it was a reminder of the fragility of justice in a system resistant to change. The streets of Brookwood, once alive with protests and counter-protests, had grown quieter in the weeks following the court's ruling. The Oversight Board wasted no time in taking action, launching its first series of investigations into misconduct allegations. Residents watched closely, their trust in the board tempered by years of disappointment in similar promises. For Malcolm, the victory brought no relief. Instead, it introduced a new wave of challenges. The board's credibility hinges on its first decisions, he told Lieutenant Rebecca Hayes during a strategy meeting. If we falter now, they'll use it as an excuse to discredit everything we've fought for. Hayes nodded. We have to make sure the process is transparent. Every decision has to be above reproach. Their first major test came when the board received a formal complaint against a high-ranking officer, Captain Sullivan, accusing him of covering up misconduct within his division. Sullivan was popular among his peers, and the complaint immediately drew backlash from the police union. This is a witch hunt, the union rep declared during a televised press conference. Captain Sullivan has served this department with honor for over 2 decades. This board has no right to drag his name through the mud. But Alicia Harper's relentless investigation revealed damning evidence, emails implicating Sullivan in multiple cover-ups, including one involving Briggs and Riley. The Oversight Board moved forward with the investigation, sparking another wave of public debate. While Malcolm worked behind the scenes, Aaliyah began to step more confidently into her role as a voice for change. Her school presentations and community events became a source of inspiration for young people across Brookwood. During one event at a local youth center, a boy named Marcus approached her. He couldn't have been more than 12, his small frame dwarfed by his oversized hoodie. My dad got pulled over last week, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but they searched his car anyway. He said it's just something we have to deal with. Aaliyah crouched down to meet his gaze. It's not something we should have to deal with, she said gently, and people like my dad are working to make sure it changes. Marcus's eyes brightened. Do you think it will? I know it will, Aaliyah replied, her voice firm. Moments like these reminded her why she couldn't give up. The fight wasn't just about her, it was about every kid like Marcus who deserved to grow up without fear. As the Oversight Board's investigations gained traction, the attacks on the Jackson family intensified. One night, while Malcolm was attending a community meeting, the family's mailbox was set on fire. Camille discovered the smoldering remains the next morning, and though the damage was minimal, the message was clear. We need to go to the police, Camille insisted, her voice trembling. And report it to the same system we're trying to hold accountable? Malcolm asked, his frustration evident. They need to know they can't intimidate us, Camille shot back. Reluctantly, Malcolm agreed, but his doubts about whether justice would be served lingered. Despite her growing confidence in public, Aaliyah still struggled privately. The weight of being a symbol for a movement was heavier than she had anticipated. One evening, as she sat alone in her room, she scrolled through social media, reading both words of support and scathing criticism. One comment stuck with her. She's just a puppet for her dad's agenda. Nothing about her story is real. The words stung more than they should have, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the cracks in her resolve. When Kayla called later that night, Aaliyah broke down. I don't know if I can keep doing this, she admitted, her voice shaking. Kayla, always the voice of reason, replied, You don't have to do it alone. Lean on the people who care about you. We've got you. Her friend's words were a balm to her soul, reminding her that even in her darkest moments, she wasn't alone. The Oversight Board's investigation into Captain Sullivan reached its conclusion after weeks of deliberation. The findings were clear. Sullivan had knowingly covered up multiple instances of misconduct, including falsified reports and harassment claims. The board recommended his immediate dismissal, a decision that sent shockwaves through the department. Sullivan's supporters decried the move as politically motivated, while others saw it as a necessary step toward accountability. For the Jackson family, it was a bittersweet moment. "It's not about celebrating someone's downfall," Malcolm said during a dinner conversation. "It's about making sure the system works the way it's supposed to." Aaliyah nodded, her determination reigniting. "And making sure no one else has to go through what I did." As the movement continued to grow, Aaliyah began to envision what true change could look like. Inspired by her own experiences, she worked with local activists to develop programs aimed at educating young people about their rights during police encounters. "We can't just wait for the system to change," she said during a planning meeting. "We have to empower people to protect themselves in the meantime." The initiative, dubbed Know Your Rights, launched with workshops at schools and community centers, quickly gaining traction. One evening, as Malcolm and Aaliyah walked through Brookwood's revitalized streets, they noticed a mural painted on the side of a building. It depicted a young black girl standing tall, surrounded by words like hope, justice, and courage. "That's you," Malcolm said, his voice filled with pride. Aaliyah stared at the mural, her heart swelling with emotion. For the first time, she saw herself not just as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience and change. "We still have a long way to go," she said softly. Malcolm smiled. "But we're getting there." A new dawn. The streets of Brookwood felt different now. The protests had subsided, the tension had eased, and the city was beginning to breathe again. But the echoes of the movement lingered, on walls painted with murals of hope, in classrooms where students discussed systemic change, and in the quiet determination of those who had once felt powerless. For Aaliyah Jackson, life would never be the same. She had faced fear, injustice, and doubt, but she had emerged stronger, her voice louder than ever, and she wasn't alone. The movement she and her father had helped ignite had taken on a life of its own, spreading beyond Brookwood and inspiring others to stand up for accountability and justice. The Civilian Oversight Board, once a contentious idea, had become a cornerstone of Brookwood's justice system. Under the leadership of diverse and dedicated members, the board had already brought light to cases that had been buried for years. Officers like Briggs and Riley were no longer protected by a culture of impunity, and Captain Sullivan's dismissal had sent a clear message: no one was above the law. Lieutenant Rebecca Hayes had been promoted to acting chief of police, a move that symbolized the department's commitment to rebuilding trust. Under her leadership, mandatory training programs on racial bias and de-escalation techniques were implemented, and new policies ensured transparency and accountability. But the most profound change wasn't in the policies or the leadership, it was in the people. The community of Brookwood, once divided by fear and mistrust, had found unity in their shared struggle. Months after the Oversight Board's first victory, Aaliyah was invited to speak at a national summit on justice reform. Standing on a brightly lit stage in front of thousands of people, she took a deep breath, her heart pounding with anticipation. "My name is Aaliyah Jackson," she began, her voice steady and clear. "And I never thought I'd be standing here today. I never wanted to be the face of a movement, but sometimes life chooses for you." She paused, letting her words sink in. "When I was stopped by two officers on a quiet road one night, I thought my story would end there. I thought my voice didn't matter, but I was wrong. My voice mattered, and so does yours." The audience erupted into applause, but Aaliyah wasn't done. "This fight isn't just about one person or one town. It's about all of us. It's about creating a world where no one has to live in fear of those who are supposed to protect us. And it's a fight we can only win together." Back in Brookwood, the Jackson family finally found a moment of peace. On a sunny afternoon, they gathered at the park where Aaliyah had once played as a child. Camille spread out a picnic blanket, while Malcolm grilled burgers on a small portable barbecue. "You've done amazing things, Aaliyah," Camille said, handing her daughter a plate. "But don't forget to take time for yourself." "I know, Mom," Aaliyah replied, smiling. "I'm learning to balance it." Malcolm joined them, his usual stern expression softened by a rare grin. "You've made me proud, Aaliyah. not just for what you've done, but for who you've become." Aliyah looked at her parents, gratitude swelling in her chest. "I couldn't have done any of it without you." As they laughed and ate, the weight of the past months began to feel lighter. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Aliyah posted a video on social media, a final message to those who had followed her journey. "Hi everyone," she began, her face glowing in the soft light of her room. "It's been a long road, but I wanted to take a moment to thank you for standing with me, for believing in justice, and for fighting for change." She paused, her eyes reflecting a mix of exhaustion and hope. "This isn't the end of the fight. It's just the beginning. We still have so much work to do. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that our voices are powerful. When we speak up, we can change the world." She leaned closer to the camera, her tone earnest. "So I'm asking you, don't stop here. Share your story. Stand up for what's right. And if this journey has inspired you even a little, hit that like button, leave a comment, and let's keep this conversation going. Together we can make a difference." As she ended the recording, Aliyah felt a sense of closure. Her journey wasn't over, but she was ready for whatever came next. Brookwood wasn't perfect, but it was better. The streets that once echoed with anger and despair now hummed with hope and determination. And at the heart of it all was a young girl who had turned her fear into strength, her silence into a powerful voice. As Aliyah stood on her porch that night, looking out at the city she had helped change, she whispered to herself, "We did it." And for the first time in a long time, she truly believed it.